Blog Talk Radio.
This country has been attacked with nuclear weapons. Communications have been severely disrupted, and the number of casualties and the extent of the damage are not yet known. We shall bring you further information as soon as possible. Meanwhile,
welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Hypergalactic Enigmas. I'm your host, Dr. Franklin Rule, along with co-host Benny Gooseland, and our special guest tonight, Dr. X. Our topic, intriguing governmental conspiracies and cover-ups. But first, a trivia question for you. Let me read it, extricate here from its paper prison. The question: how many horns did the newly discovered dinosaur called the Cosmoceratops have? It's multiple choice. Was that 5 horns, 10, 15, 20, or 25? Benny, what's your answer?
Well, I'm going to go with 5.
5. And how about Dr. X? Do you have an answer?
Let me see. The Cosmoceratops, I'm going to go with, I know it had many. I'll go with 10.
Okay, you're both wrong with an extraordinary 15 horns. Newly discovered.
Wow.
Yes. Now, we'll learn later why I'm asking a dinosaur question tonight. But with regard to conspiracies, I should first mention that I actually have a conspiracy website at videojug.com. You can check it out. It's called The New World Order on Videojug. My name, Dr. Franklin Rule, R-U-E-H-L. And let me just briefly mention how I got into that. On my cable show, Mysteries from Beyond the Other Dominion, I, of course, have covered many conspiracies. I went to an audition having nothing better to do one day for a George Bush imitator, which I don't look like him, but I thought I could sound a little like him. But one of the fellows read my resume and asked if I could handle a conspiracy website for them and do some taping. And I said, of course. They said, forget George Bush. We're going to use you for this. And it worked out very well. Then I started to send them my Realm of Bizarre News weekly Top 13. They put that on for 48 weeks. But after having told me how much they loved me, they then suspended it, at least for the time being. But I have covered many conspiracies. So to start with, I just want to cover a couple of the, let's say, the most famous conspiracies. Possibly number one conspiracy of all time, the JFK assassination, shot back on November 22nd, 1963. Was it just by Lee Harvey Oswald? Was there one or more other gunmen, such as in the grassy knoll? Was this a conspiracy, or was he a lone assassin? Well, I'm inclined to believe that there was a conspiracy. For one thing, in his vantage point from the book depository, he could have shot directly, had a frontal aim at President Kennedy coming down in the motorcade. Why did he take a side window where he had a side shot and would not be as accurate? Also, why is it that the police, that one policeman after him after the assassination, was he being set up as a mark? And, of course, we ask if he was shot by Jack Ruby, if that was a plot, or if that just happened that Jack Ruby, as some say, he just happened to be there with his gun. But I'm inclined to believe that there was a conspiracy with JFK involved. Of course, we think of Lyndon Baines Johnson being the perpetrator. Of course, you ask, well, would he dare risk killing Kennedy in his own backyard? Well, it's a possibility. But I'm open to this being a legitimate conspiracy. Now let's take another one.
Also, Doctor.
Yes?
On that, if I'm not mistaken, Kennedy, he was, it was around like there was a Masonic lodge, and some people say that, the Freemasons had a hand in on that.
Well, we've had many different, as I said, organized criminals, Fidel Castro, and possibly supporters of Lyndon Baines Johnson, and as you say, the Masons. So there are many possible conspiracy groups that could have been involved, but I'm inclined to believe it wasn't just the one man. Now we go.
If he would have just been a puppet, he wouldn't have. You know what I mean? If he would have just been a puppet.
Set up just to be the fall guy. But I think that's a possibility. Now let's go to the lunar landing, which is possibly one of the best-known conspiracies, that we did not actually land on the moon. Well, I don't believe that. I do believe we landed on the moon. For example, Wernher von Braun and this German team had developed the rockets. They were ready to go into space. They're just waiting for the right time. And if this was a fake, why would we stage 6 landings? Why not just one and say, okay, we've seen it, there's nothing there? And, of course, included in the 6, we have Apollo 13, which was a disaster. Why would they contrive a disaster as if this was phony? So, and then, of course, we have the retrieval of the lunar rocks, which have been verified as being from another body, not Earth-like rocks. So I'm 100% certain that we did land on the moon. I also point out that I was disappointed with our lunar program because, first of all, the Russians actually jump-started our space program with Sputnik. Then the space director got into political hot water and died a mysterious death. I think it was just 41 years old, and that destroyed their space program. They didn't give us any challenge. They weren't sending any probes to any manned missions to the moon. So we then canceled Apollos 17, 18, and 19, which, first of all, would have included exploration of lunar caves where I believe we might have been able to find some type of at least primitive life forms. And, of course, could have been the basis for establishing a permanent lunar base and set the stage for going to Mars. Warner von Braun had originally planned to send 2 spacecraft to Mars in 1981. Each would spend 6 months there, once on the ground for 6 months, the other in orbit, and they'd switch places and return together. We should have a flourishing lunar and a flourishing Martian base today. Instead, we retrogressed and went to the International Space Station and the space shuttles. Originally, in sci-fi films, they showed that we'd first have, say, an orbiting space station, and that would be the stepping stone to going to the moon. But in reality, we proved you could go directly to the moon. So our space program has really retrogressed over the past few decades, and I'm disappointed because we should be already exploring, have permanent bases on the moon and Mars. But I don't believe that there was a conspiracy as far as the lunar landing goes. And I want to just talk about one other alien-related conspiracy. A man, Hayden Hughes, noted ufologist, claims that back in 1957, a Venusian humanoid landed in Alexandria, Virginia, and then was escorted to the White House, where he met with President Eisenhower and several top executives, and he also met with Hayden Hughes. And they said that there were 77 aliens on Earth who were going to try to protect Earth. We don't know if this is true or not, but it certainly sounds feasible. What I wanted to point out was that Hayden Hughes then became quite well known as a ufologist. He says that back in 1974, some 17 years later, when he was just had landed in Vegas, he was going to deliver a speech, he was met by 2 so-called MIBs, or men in black, who drove him out to the desert, beat him up, and left him to die. Now, he survived and has been quite active. But again, a possibility here of a conspiracy, government trying to cover up UFO information, and individuals, we can call them MIBs, I don't know if they're always dressed in black, and that ties in with our guest tonight, who apparently has been shadowed by government agents. So, Benny, would you introduce our guest with a few introductory remarks?
Yes, this is Dr. X, who's had a few experiences tonight he'll tell us about. Let's see, I guess if you want, Doctor, you want to get started with, is there anything? I just want to ask you a question,
Dr. X. You said that you had been shadowed, and I believe you said these agents might have even been outside your home. So I assume they already know your identity. Why are you now concealing it under the name Dr. X?
Well, as far as broadcasting this, I don't think that they are expecting me to get to a level to want to bring this to the public. I think that I've been written off as somebody that's uneducated and really doesn't know what they've found, so I don't think that they for sure know me as a threat, so I don't want to then connect my education and my theories about what I'm doing here with my actual name. So,
have you seen any like around where you work or anything like unmarked vehicles or any strange vehicles that maybe circle around your place, or have you seen anything like that?
Yes, both myself and my associate, who's a paleontologist, who my specialty is cryptozoology, and so we kind of have dovetailed our knowledge together to work on this research. We both have had instances of very conspicuous windowless unmarked vans parked outside that are very unfamiliar to both near our neighborhood and each of our houses and our offices. A couple different times when we spoke about this on our landline, and in very vague terms, it might be paranoia on our part. I try to be skeptical about this, but heard the sound of the clicking sound of a potential, like a wiretap or something. So we've communicated with just cell phones and cell phones that no one really knows that we have. So
I heard on some cell phones it doesn't have like a GPS, maybe like the prepay. If I'm not mistaken, you can't be traced with like a
Correct.
prepay phone. That's what I've heard. So that's true?
Yeah.
That's cool.
With what we've done, that is true.
There was one time I went. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Continue.
Oh, I was going to say one time, the reason I asked you about like the vehicles, I went to, I think it was Washington, and it was when Clinton, he had just bought a house there or something, and so we was all out taking pictures. And then I thought, well, maybe we should be asked if we should do this. So I went up to one of, I guess he was the Secret Service or something. I said, hey, is it okay if we take these pictures? And he said, yeah, that's fine. So we're snapping away, and everybody's getting out of the van, and everybody's gathering around and taking pictures. So next thing we know, out of nowhere, there's all of these vehicles pulling up, black vehicles, unmarked vehicles. Every one of them has tinted windows. So they just kind of came out of nowhere, and all we were doing was taking pictures. And so in your case, that's why I was asking if you'd seen anything like this, because normally when you get a hold of a hotcake, it seems like the Secret Service is right on your heels. Whether they're going to tap your lines, your computer, or whatever. They're right there.
Yeah, we've been as far as the data that we have with the evidence that we've found, which I will talk about. We've kept that on hard drives, portable hard drives that are not possibly reachable online. We don't want the information to be able to be accessed via our computers, and are trying to be as safe with it as possible. Have not been approached by anybody about this yet, which is thankful. We were a bit nervous about it, but neither of us has been approached by any sort of man in black or government authority that's acting suspicious or anything. So that's been to our benefit so far.
Okay,
well, it's good that you've not had any.
Pardon me?
Will you now tell us what you found?
Yes, absolutely, Dr. Rule. I was actually in the hiking, just kind of doing some research of the flora and fauna around there in the Cascade Mountains. I was near Snoqualmie Falls, just east of it. This is in Washington State. There's a lake called Little Cochise Lake, and we were in the north, or I was by myself first in the northwest corner there, and I found some just really bizarre bones. And I'm not as skilled at identifying these. I originally thought it was a part of a scapula, and there were very prominent teeth that I found in the area as well. And I grabbed them and I brought them back to my associate in Eastern Washington, and he said not only were these not fossilized bones, but these were, from what he could tell, bones of a large reptile that the closest he could describe it to would be a dinosaur. So we went back the next weekend. This was in the beginning of August. So we went back the next weekend to the same location. It's just kind of south-ish of Cooper Lake there. And we spent a couple days looking around, and we found quite a few vertebrae sections and massive. But we both had backpacks full of equipment. I mean, we managed to stuff, I believe, a dozen to 20 bone fragments or full bones pieces in there. And upon further study, he says there's no fossilization to these whatsoever, but they don't match any current living reptile of that size. We're estimating it's around 6 to 8 feet in length. We're not sure, given that we can't fully identify the length of the tail of the creature at this point. But that's what we found. On the second day of going back to the location, we were greeted at the U.S. Forest Service trail road to get to the lake where we had been looking, and everything was roped off. There were U.S. forest officials and other armed federal officials that I had not recognized their uniforms. They had black uniforms, but not in a men in black type of way, but it just seemed like some sort of military personnel of some sort, and they said that there was a gas line that had exploded in the area, and that there's a 5-acre region that was off limits to the public at this point in this Wenatchee National Park there where we were. And it just seemed weirdly coincidental because it was just on the heels of us having gone there. I've gone there multiple times, never had a problem, and it just doesn't seem feasible even that there's a gas line running through that area. So it seems as though something was trying to be covered up, or our returning there clued off somebody that we were finding something. We're not quite sure what actually is known by the government about this, but it looks to be that there are some large reptiles currently living in the Pacific Northwest, and the woods are so dense there that we think that's what's going on.
Could be like a Jurassic Park kind of thing going on. I mean, maybe
absolutely. I mean, there's the possibility there's some genetic experimentation going on as far as recouping some sort of preserved DNA of a dinosaur. It's the perfect location for that. It's very secluded and small populations, even distant from there. I mean, it's very isolated.
Yeah, importing, like they could, you got the dinosaurs, okay, then they could take them to the lab or whatever, bring them back, transporting back and forth. There's a Godzilla movie, I can't remember which one it was, but they actually had like a piece of land that they could live, and then somehow or another they end up getting out of that. But yeah, that's kind of like what that.
All the creatures were isolated on an island. That was the idea. But I want to ask real quick, with the teeth, did you analyze them, or your paleontologist associate analyze them to determine if these creatures were predatory or vegetarian in nature?
Actually, yes, we did. We have a theory right now, and we're still really investigating this as much as possible. This has happened so quickly. But we're most definitely sure that this is an herbivore. Okay. Most likely it's looking to be from the hadrosaur family, and doing the research that in the, let me see here from my notes, the late Cretaceous, there were larger ones, Edmontosaurus in the area. Basically, the whole hadrosaur family. There were a lot of them, in the late Cretaceous, living in the Northwest. So we're still trying to ferret out the information as far as whether there was one of these species that survived the Ice Age by diminishing in size and becoming smaller the way mammals survived through the Ice Age.
Tall, as I recall, they're about 20 feet tall for the hadrosaurs in general.
Yeah, and so this creature is much smaller than that. I mean, even the Edmontosaurus, which would be native, would be 43 feet long, is what the largest one that they've found so far. So this is quite smaller, but the structure of the bones, and that's the thing that my colleague has been very adamant about, seems dead on to at least the family of hadrosaur, if not more specific, very much like the Edmontosaurus.
So that leads to a couple of questions. As you said, did some dinosaurs find an ecological niche to survive in, and as you say, perhaps shrunk over the eons for survival? And of course,
right.
We have all these reports of lake monsters and sea serpents, where an aquatic dinosaur might have a better chance of surviving the devastation from 65 million years ago. Land dinosaurs not as likely, but it's certainly a possibility considering the size of our planet and the various ecological niches that we do have. So that would be one question. The other question I want to ask, is it possible that this is a Jurassic Park type of experiment? For example, back in 2005, down at Dr. Mary Schweitzer down at the North Carolina State University did recover viable soft tissue samples from a T-Rex specimen 70 million years ago, which was extraordinary, because you'd expect all the blood cells and tissue to be fossilized, but that opens the question of other dinosaur samples that we've recovered over the centuries, if they might have some soft tissue that could then be extracted and perhaps genetic research done to recreate these entities. So is this possibly an experiment by the government to recreate these entities for whatever reason, perhaps in the future creating some sort of reptilian humanoid soldier? Or either, which are you inclined to agree with? Okay.
You know, right now, I tend to, I mean, if the evidence presents itself, I definitely would lean toward that being a possibility. Given what we have so far, I've been trying to stay a little bit conservative and find out at least why these are living there first before motives behind it, as far as what the mechanism was of either survival or repopulation of a species via some sort of DNA, experiment possibly done by the government to recreate a dinosaur, or like you said, a hybrid, some sort of. There may be that aspect to it, but right now we're trying to, as extraordinary as this is, keep this in the realm of hard science and keep it realistic for right now, just in wanting to be fair to the data that we have.
I was wondering, how are they confined? Now, I know you said there's a heavily forested area. I'm thinking, for example, I've been on a Bigfoot expedition up to northern Manitoba back in 2005, and the forest was so dense that you would have a difficult time trying to hunt down a Bigfoot creature if he does indeed exist. But we know that if according to legend and reports, that Bigfoot, if he exists, is a semi-intelligent creature who would deliberately avoid humans. But these dinosaurs might look upon humans perhaps, if they're herbivores not, but at least they might be more difficult to confine because they're not necessarily trying to avoid humans. So is there any sort of electromagnetic force field or fence that would keep them in?
There's definitely a possibility of that. I mean, if this is something that is a genetic modification there could be a genetic modification that their way that, to electronic fence or some sort of like sound barrier thing, a way that they could actually corral them without being conspicuous in a confined area. And there are plenty of dense areas within the Wenatchee National Forest that people don't ever even go, that would be prime for this type of herbivore to survive.
Well, when I was flying up to Canada, we were passing from Winnipeg to northern Manitoba. I was really impressed with the forestation in the west, north, east, south, left, right. That's so dense that you could have many creatures, bizarre creatures hidden within. But the question is, could they possibly, with their natural instincts, just start moving out of the area? So they have to be confined, I would think.
Yeah, one other possibility that we had talked about, and this is still in the beginning phases of theory, is that since we have in Washington the Olympic National Rainforest, that it's a very lush place, and I'm not sure exactly what the environment of that was like during the last major ice age. The dinosaurs possibly survived through some level of this, and again, evolved smaller, or whatever methodology that they got there. But that lush nature of the rainforest, it's the only temperate rainforest in the U.S. that they could get through to the forested areas of northern and western Washington, and that would be a suitable environment.
Has anyone reported seeing a dinosaur that you know of? I haven't heard any reports myself of dinosaurs, certainly up in that area.
No, and
in
this is
Africa,
so shocking. No, we've had no reports of that. Granted, Bigfoot sightings here are a dime a dozen. That type of thing happens in the Northwest quite frequently. But to my research, I've not found any reports of any sort of large living reptiles in the Northwest.
Okay, I was going to mention that Dr. Dale Russell, back in 1982 from the National Museum of Canada, had hypothesized that the dinos had not died out, that one, the Stenonychosaurus, which was a 3-foot-tall raptor which had a very large brain for its body size, would have evolved into an upright standing reptilian humanoid with a fairly well-developed brain. Well, the dinosaurs,
I do remember that.
Yeah, the dinosaurs did die out, but perhaps a few survived, and conceivably there could be an intelligent somewhat intelligent entity that's more evolved, and perhaps they would try to have the sense to avoid humans and be something the government would be interested in, perhaps for some sort of even soldier of the future. There's a report that Stalin in 1932 had set up a lab trying to create a hybrid human ape for a soldier. The experiments apparently were failures, but that seems to be at least one idea that's a viable idea, that the government might have that type of ultimate destiny in mind, that they could create some type of soldier out of this dinosaur.
That's the one frustrating thing about our find, was that we didn't find any cranial skull fragments. We were really wanting to be able to assess the brain size of this creature to see whether or not, if it was evolved and increased in brain size over the course of its evolution, or it was more of a government thing that is bringing back the DNA of an already extinct dinosaur. So we are actually planning in another month to go into a nearby area there that has very similar conditions. I wouldn't like to disclose just because in case anybody would be listening that would care, but it's in Washington in the same area, and we're going to actually go and try to just do a real quick weekend of searching in the same type of environment nearby.
Were you able to determine from the finds how many different creatures the bones might have come from?
At first, it looked like this was all from one creature, but then we were finding a couple duplicate vertebrae that seemed to be right near the pelvic region of the spine that made us believe that we've found most of the bones that we have found have been from one, but that there might be other there. We weren't in quite a rush the first day because we didn't expect to be ambushed as we were the second day. So there were more bones there for us to find in the dirt. We ran out of daylight, and so we kind of need to approach this from a different angle. But we really have the desire to find more of this. We need to find at least a partially complete skeleton to have a better idea of what we're working with here.
Are you going to go alone or with one other individual, or bring a team along?
Just myself and one other individual. The colleague of mine that is the paleontologist. He has an instinct for this. He's dead on in being able to cite what the bone is far quicker than I am. I take a lot of scrutiny and kind of break things apart a bit more. But both of us are going to go there just so as not to arouse as much suspicion. Just two guys camping, just going hiking in the woods is kind of the cover story for this as we go in.
We have 90 seconds left. As we were talking there, it reminds me of something. Past couple of years, I've been seeing these really huge, gigantic snapping turtles here, and normally we don't see those, here. But there's trains. I live in eastern Kentucky, and I live up ahead of a hollow, and there's trains that run, and they carry all these freights and different tanks and all sorts of different equipment. And I used to do quite a bit of four-wheeling, and one day, on one of the trails that I normally go, the next day they had purposely blasted boulders, and they had the equipment to push these boulders in to block these different roads. And there used to be a pond we used to go to all the time, and one day they just all of a sudden overnight closed down the pond, and there's even a case here a few miles from here where they were polluting the water, and there's like a case going now where the government or the coal company is in trouble because of pollution in the water, So I'm not really sure what they're packing in these freights, tanks. But we're seeing all these strange, large creatures coming out of the woodworks, and trails and different things are being blocked off for no reason. People are going out of their way to keep us from going places where we normally go.
That sounds similar to what I've experienced, absolutely.
Let's see how much time we got left here. We have, Doctor, you want to go ahead and take us on out?
Okay. Thank you for being our guest, and we'll try to have you